Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the MSF webinar tonight, where we will be talking about working with MSF in a mental health capacity. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land in Sydney, on which I'm joining you from today, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. MSF is an international independent medical humanitarian organisation that provides medical assistance to people affected by conflict, epidemics, disasters, or exclusion from healthcare. When people think of MSF, the image that often comes to mind is one of doctors and nurses working in incredibly challenging situations and environments to provide essential care. However, MSF is much more than this. Our teams consist of doctors and nurses, logisticians, finance and HR specialists, and a number of other medical professionals. Today, we're going to be looking specifically at the role that mental health professionals play within MSF, why mental health is as important as physical health, the types of work international psychologists and psychiatrists do within MSF, and the experience needed to be successful in this journey. Our panelists today are Greg Keane and Sarah Dina. Greg is a psychiatrist who's had a long career with MSF. He's completed placements with MSF in Jordan, Palestine, and Iraq before taking the position of mental health advisor with MSF France. He's recently returned to Australia, and we're very fortunate to have his expertise with us today. Welcome, Greg. We also have Sarah. Sarah is a clinical psychologist who has completed 5 placements with MSF, working in Pakistan, Syria, and Sierra Leone. She also has extensive experience as a clinical psychologist within Australia, including rural and remote experience. Welcome, Sarah. Now, mental health is often overlooked in humanitarian work, but it plays a critical role in the overall recovery and well-being of the affected populations. Greg, why is mental health as important as physical health? And why is this particularly relevant in the situations that MSF operates in?
Well, I think, we've talked about this before. We're, preaching to the converted here. There's no health without mental health. And so inclusion of mental health as part of a healthcare response in MSF in any context that we work should be and mostly is central. It tends to, in the last 10 years, form a central, or at least an important part of every project where we work.
Fantastic. Sarah, did you have anything to add to this?
I think Greg summed it up really well. I think particularly in the last few years, there's been more and more of an acknowledgement of the importance of mental health and the impact of the physical trauma on people's psychological well-being as well. So I think we're seeing that more and more. If we think about the impact of conflict, infectious diseases, ongoing poverty, and the impact that can have on a person's social, emotional, and psychological well-being. As Greg said, we're preaching to the choir here, and we all know here how important that is. And Jen, I don't know if now might be a time for me to just share a bit of a quick little example of that. I think, we know that in some of our projects, the mental health counselling rooms are the only place that some of our clients can talk about some of their experiences, some of their daily experiences. And I'll just give a quick little example from Sierra Leone in terms of just the creativity that we also have in our projects and the impact that mental health can have on physical health. I was in an Ebola mission in Sierra Leone, and I remember one young 14-year-old boy who had Ebola, and he had lost a number of members of his family, his parents, his older brother, his younger brother, and 3 siblings remained, and they were in home quarantine. And he was in our treatment centre, but he just wouldn't get out of bed. He wasn't able to get out of bed. So myself and one of the mental health counsellors went to visit his siblings, and I'll cut a very long story short, but, we took photographs of them with their permission, obviously, and brought that to him in the centre. And the next morning, for the first time in 2 weeks, he was out of his bed and we were out sitting with the other patients and clients and able to sort of engage. And it was then that we were able to see that he was slowly starting to get better. So just that connection to his family and the impact that had on his emotional well-being actually was a significant driver in terms of his physical health and well-being and him getting better. So yeah, I mean, I think it's just a crucial part of the work that we do.
Fantastic. Sorry. It's so wonderful to hear some examples of some of these stories that sort of really bring home to people how important this work is within the spaces that we operate. So thank you for sharing that with us, Sarah. Now, based on after that story, I have to ask you, how did you feel the experience with MSF impacted your clinical practice once you returned to Australia? Sarah, sorry.
Yes, certainly. Oh gosh, in so many ways. And I'm trying. I was reflecting before on how to summarize this. Certainly, I think I've come back with a greater depth of practice, and a a capacity to hold people's pain in a way that I don't even know that I had before. As mental health professionals, that's what we're used to doing. But there's something about being on an assignment in the places that MSF works, and just being sitting with challenge and pain, and in a way that I had not experienced before. Certainly, greater exposure and understanding of cultural factors, and that's impacted my work positively and significantly. And I think I just have more confidence now and capacity to sit with the unknown and the uncertainty in the work that we do as psychologists and psychiatrists and mental health professionals. I will say, though, that one of the challenges in terms of coming back, and one of the impacts, I think, on my clinical practice is that, there is a struggle in terms of reintegrating when you come back. And it has sometimes been harder to sort of sit with, for want of a better word, the worried well. And, we go into every client and patient with that non-judgment, But I think after seeing some of what we see on MSF assignments coming back, that can be hard sometimes to sort of work in Australia again. But yeah, so that's probably
And
what I would say.
reintegration is definitely something that people can experience across professions with organisations like MSF. It's not uncommon to have people have that experience of coming back to their home country and being totally overwhelmed by supermarkets and choices, and it can be more of a struggle than people anticipate. Just sort of going between experiences. We do have supports available for people who may need some additional support, or just an ear to talk to about what this experience was like for them. But it's definitely a reality of the work that we do. Now, Greg, a slightly topical one for you. We're often asked why we don't recruit international psychologists without a clinical master's. Could you give us some insight into this, please?
Sure. And Jen, you're asking me this question because, part of my role in MSF for 5 years was as an international mental health advisor. So we have 10 or 12 advisors internationally. We all work together representing the various countries where MSF works and where MSF recruits from. And it's based on an international standard. It's not coming from an Australian perspective. We really respect psychologists registered psychologists in Australia, psychologists that aren't clinical psychologists. Internationally, however, there are a lot of places where we can only send clinical psychologists based on the requirements in those countries, and we have to meet that. And so internationally, it was decided that would be the level of training required. And in fact, sometimes it's higher than that in some places. It can be a PhD. We fought to keep it at a clinical master level rather than above that.
So what I'm hearing from you is that while we recognise that non-clinical psychologists also provide exceptional care within Australia, the nature of the places that we work means that we're required to comply with an internationally set standard. From a recruitment perspective, I'd like to add that one reason we have the minimum criteria is to reduce the likelihood of recruiting people that we'll be unable to find placements for. So the recruitment process with MSF is only the first step, and the process of finding a matching for you after recruitment remains a competitive one, with candidates from Australia and New Zealand competing with qualified candidates from around the world. And we want to give people the best chance possible to succeed in this process. The last thing that we want to do is recruit people that then sit waiting for assignment without us actually being able to send them on an assignment, because it's incredibly frustrating for everybody involved in that. So we do our best. Greg, the other thing I wanted to ask you, could you please expand on opportunities for psychiatrists with MSF and why this can be a particularly rewarding addition to a psychiatric career?
Oh, thank you, Jen. Look, I'm a psychiatrist. I can strongly recommend MSF as a great opportunity for psychiatrists, and in fact for psychiatry registrars who have at least 6 semesters of experience, ideally who've passed their first set of exams and completed that first 3 years. Look, I can speak from personal experience. I arrived in MSF, more than 10 years ago now, I think 12 years ago, as a reasonably new, inexperienced psychiatrist with, I guess, clinical experience, as we all do. And what MSF gave me was a much bigger picture of what it's like to set up a project, what it's like to strategize and consider the bigger picture, what it's like to work in a true multidisciplinary team, and to really consider the value that other people are bringing and to work within that project. I just found it incredibly eye-opening. It's also really enriched. It can also really enrich your clinical perspectives, as Sarah was talking about and alluded to. You can spend a lot of time working with interpreters. You spend a lot of time. Most of the work for a psychiatrist is, in fact, what we would call upskilling, or transferring your knowledge to people who might not have even a medical degree, and sometimes not even a nursing degree, who might be what we call clinical officers. And so teaching and supervising clinical officers to diagnose and manage people with severe mental disorder. And it's a really interesting and valuable experience to decide what kind of things are crucial and what are important, and what things can we perhaps let go of. And then how do we manage things like supervision and support people professionally and clinically? There's some of my thoughts. I'd really like to hear Sarah's thoughts about that too, because, Sarah, you've worked with psychiatrists in the field, I guess.
Well, interestingly, actually, Greg, I haven't worked with any psychiatrists in an MSF assignment, actually. So, yes, local, no, I haven't. So there were definitely places that it would have been useful, but no, I haven't. Yeah.
Yes, Sarah, that raises the question of how do you manage things in a project as a psychologist if you don't have a psychiatrist on staff?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and a tricky question, and a good question all at the same time. And a lot of it depends on the particular project, the particular country, the particular circumstances that we're in. So generally speaking, for all of the places I've been, we have a medical doctor on, or medical doctors, either as part of the international staff or local staff. So they would be our go-to is the mental health counselling team, in terms of seeking advice from them, although they may not necessarily have the psychiatric or mental health background. They have, the medical background. So that we rely on them for consultation, and also rely on, on our head office. Greg was in the position of mental health advisor. So we often rely on our head office staff to sort of advise and consult when there's situations like that in the project. So there are times where we might, there may be local, local hospitals and local organisations that we can sort of utilise, but it really it's so dependent on the particular project. So
I guess this is why we ask for people with flexibility and adaptability in their skill sets.
Exactly. And I think with that comes the capacity to develop relationships as well, because, you know, you're really having to rely on the whole team approach and you know, knowing where to go for support and help. So, yeah.
Now, we've spoken a little bit about, we've spoken about psychologists and psychiatrists. For other mental health professionals, we don't currently actively recruit. We don't currently have international positions open for specialists outside of clinical psychologists and psychiatrists. However, our needs do change, and there may be new opportunities coming up. And it could be worthwhile for people who feel that their experience could be relevant to the work that we do to register under our other specialists form. And we can be in contact if an appropriate opportunity becomes available. This form can be found under the Who We Need section of our website. Now, due to the nature of the work we do, sometimes we have needs for medical subspecialists that we don't typically recruit, and this is why we have a database of interested professionals that we can contact if a particular need arises. So registering for this list, it's not the same as applying for a position. We will only contact you if a suitable opportunity comes up, but it is a way of expressing interest if something comes up in the future. Now, Greg, you started with MSF as a psychiatrist and then moved into one of our operational centres in Europe, or in France, as we've discussed. Could you speak about your experience of career progression with MSF and share some insights into what options might be available for mental health professionals who are interested in developing careers with MSF?
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I started as a what we call a first mission psychiatrist or psychiatrist position, and you know, that was in Iraq, working with Syrian Kurdish refugees and responding to the war that was going on in Syria. And that was a direct clinical role. So I was delivering direct mental health care, direct psychiatry, a little bit of training and supervision of counselors. So I was the only mental health professional. I was doing psychological care. So I have skills in psychological therapy, which I was using. And I relied on the support that Sarah had alluded to of the clinical experts in the headquarters when I needed to discuss really complex cases. And then I moved on to a management role. So we have a role called Mental Health Activity Manager, which manages a whole team. This is a role that Sarah is really familiar with as well, and probably our bread and butter role in mental health after psychologist and psychiatrist. And in that role, you're really involved in setting up, sometimes usually managing and supervising teams and considering strategy, everything from finances down to, you know, how the team works and how the team's transported, how you consider who a patient is going to be and who that group of patients is going to be and why. So it's really interesting in terms of giving you management skills. And from that position, I then moved to what we call a regional position. So I was based in Jordan, as Jen mentioned at the beginning, but I was covering and traveled to and worked in places like Yemen. I worked in Turkey, around Syria, back in Iraq again, and worked on a kind of a regional mental health response. And I was responsible for supporting and sometimes supervising those activity managers, and also supporting our medical leaders in thinking about how to develop and consider mental health strategy and integration of mental health activities into all of our projects. And that was fantastic, traveling around, really trying to understand these contexts, understanding what kind of support was available in terms of the skills. So, you know, are there psychologists in this country? How many psychiatrists are there? Is there a workforce of counselors? How could we deliver and upscale mental health care? Are there regulations about importation of psychotropic medications? Are there regulations about who can practice what kind of types of mental health? And so I did that for a couple of years, and then moved up to the headquarter position, which I did for about 5 years, where I worked with teams all over the world, people like Sarah, people like Jen when she was a project coordinator, and got a much bigger idea of the entire strategy, and was able to contribute to strategy for MSF in mental health in general. And that's incredibly rewarding. It takes a lot of humility, and I would say a lateral thinking, a lot of creative thinking, because you are often working with people that don't necessarily agree with your vision, or don't necessarily understand, or don't have experience with the importance of mental health and psychosocial interventions. And in that role, you can also be involved at all levels in MSF. In fact, you can be involved in research, but as an advisor with technical experience, you can think in a bigger picture about what kind of research is important for us to be doing, and also contribute to communication, to témoignage, which is speaking out about what we see, which is so important for the patients we work with, to be able to support them expressing their voice about what's happening to them, and find ways of communicating what work we're doing and what's happening to people. So I just loved it. I thought it was just I've had an amazing time. It's been the highlight of my career. I'm so grateful to MSF, to all the patients I've worked with, and the huge amount of teams that I've worked with as well.
And outside of that, what other career development opportunities are there for people?
So I guess we have those clear clinical roles which people will start in, and we will try, for people we recruit, we do try to support them moving into a clinical role first. If someone comes in with a lot of management experience, the likelihood of you being asked to become a mental health activity manager first, even in a small project, is much higher. But we do try to put people in positions where they could do some clinical work. And then, as I say, there are these regional positions where you can be supporting projects in a region like the Middle East, or different parts of South and Central America, depending on your language skills. Also parts of Africa, and we also have positions. We also have occasional positions working in acute emergencies, where you might support what we call our cells, in our emergency cells, in going as a first responder with the rest of the team, and assessing a situation and saying, hey, what kind of problems exist here? How do we understand that? And what might we be able to do in this very quick situation? And what kind of long-term project could we perhaps suggest? And that's a really interesting role, a really great opportunity to have too. So I'd say they're the keys. But I think maybe Sarah could have some other suggestions about roles that she can think of.
Yeah, I'm also thinking, and this is rarer for a mental health practitioner to be in a role like this. But in many projects, we will have, sort of, you have your doctors, your nurses, your midwives, your mental health activity managers, and so on and so forth. And then oftentimes, actually, if not always, there'll be a medical team leader for the project that might sit above and sort of be the coordinator of those. It's not always not often that a mental health professional will be in that role, but if you are experienced and have a holistic way of thinking about things, that's also one of the other positions I would think of that potentially psychologists or psychiatrists would be able to would be in MSF as well. So yeah, there's sort of coordination positions within a project as well.
Absolutely.
We can't forget they can also step sideways if they want to be more operational.
Yeah.
So it's always possible, depending on your skill set and your interests, to look at developing more into an operational role, like a project coordinator, moving up into head of mission type roles. It takes significant experience, but it is a possibility for people from any background.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, did you have something else to add, Greg?
No.
It is, like, I think we can all agree that it's an incredibly rewarding career, and there's endless opportunities if you wish to develop within MSF. Talking about the reality of working with MSF and and developing, and the sort of work that you might be doing in these roles. Sarah, what are the skills that you found were the most useful, and what do you wish you'd known before you took your first assignment?
So much. So much, but there's only so much you can prepare yourself for as well, actually. You can do as much preparation as you can, but there's some things that you actually just can't prepare yourself for, I think. But in terms of the skills, look, I think from a professional perspective, I think firstly just sound practice, and for me as a clinical psychologist, for me it was just sound, basic, foundational psychological practice is what we need. We learn a lot when we're on in a project, but it's not the place to go and practice your skills if or go on an adventure. I guess I think it's really important to have those basic skills and foundational skills as a psychiatrist or psychologist, etc. I think probably one of the key things is, and it sounds very obvious, but I think it has to be said, is cultural and spiritual sensitivity is absolutely key. And Greg mentioned before humility, which I think is such an important word, and it's not even a skill really. It's just something that we need to bring in to every assignment, I think. And flexibility and adaptability. It's that favourite word of MSF, flexibility. I think it's just droned into us. And it's true, things will rarely go as you plan them to. And so having patience and being adaptable and creative, as Greg mentioned before, is really, really important. And just acknowledging our own limitations as well, I think, is something that I think is very important. And I said before, relationships and connections are absolutely key. Teamwork is really important, as Greg mentioned. You may not always be working with people that have the same ideas, and so having that capacity to be able to work across disciplines and cultures and backgrounds is really, really important. And I think as well, probably just not going in as the rescuer or the saviour. I know some of the things I'm saying sound really obvious, but I think it's just important to say that. To say those things. And probably one of the things that I knew but didn't know before I went in is that just like any other organisation, there's bureaucracy, there's paperwork, and so that's also something that you have to sit with. Some days you're sitting with having to navigate your way through the bureaucracy or the paperwork, and so again, having patience with that is really important. I think,
We often find things like rostering are things that people have done a lot of before in their jobs. And so it can come as a little bit of a surprise, but we need all of the nuts and bolts to happen so that we can do the other work as well.
Absolutely. Jen, I was just mention something else actually as well, because Greg spoke about it before, and I think it was interesting for me as a clin psych coming into this role is, I had lots of experience working with individuals and doing individual assessments and therapy and so on. But one of the other skills I think is also just being able to work, and we develop this as well, is being able to understand and assess a situation and a community and the mental health needs of a particular place. So, there is, as a mental health activity manager particularly, one of the roles is about supervising and mentoring local staff, but it's also about seeing what is required in that particular project and in that region. Are the services that we're delivering the services that need to be delivered here, or are there other needs of this community? And so that's also something that as a mental health activity manager you would be looking at as well.
And this is something that we actually look for across all of our roles. So we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have the essential criteria for our specific positions, for our clinical psychologists, for our psychiatrists. But on top of that, we also have specific criteria that we look for every single role that we recruit for. And they include things like management experience, because in almost every role that we place an international staff member in, you will be required to manage people and manage a team. And so it is a big part of all of the work that we do across the board in MSF. And I think it's really, really good to highlight that for people. Greg, from an operational perspective, what would you say are the key skills that somebody needs to succeed in this role with MSF?
I was just thinking, you were talking about team management, and I was just thinking about some of the more stressful experiences that I've had in MSF, and they haven't been, I mean, I've been through, you know, in some incredibly potentially dangerous situations. I've always felt safe, but I've been in places where there's been a lot of risk. I have to say the biggest challenge has been HR management. So, the recruitment process, making sure that's really fair, following the laws of that country, working really well with the human resources coordinator and the administration manager on the project, and performance managing people. It's very simply the similar sort of challenges here. What line management is and how I do that and how I support a team and, lead from below and support people, but also sometimes performance manage. So I think that's a big challenge operationally. As we've said, and I will repeat, look, you are working with a group of professionals from all over the world with a diversity of experience, with, from a wide range of cultures. And it's so important to stop, listen, attempt to understand where those people or that person's coming from, and not take someone's first response personally about their view on mental health. Because over and over, you might hear something like, I don't believe in mental health, or someone might just demonstrate in their action that they're not so interested. And what tends to work, and I've tried this over and over and over, is just demonstrating the benefit and presenting stories like Sarah did about her, the boys she worked with during the Ebola epidemic. And when people see that and you can show them the benefit as well, you can change hearts and minds. So I think that would be the challenge, and come with that spirit of I guess, energy, of goodwill towards people, of true teamwork, and try to be really present. I think as mental health professionals, we can sometimes cocoon ourselves together or separate ourselves off. And I see that people that succeed the most on missions are the ones that open themselves up to everyone and try to learn something from, everyone's experience.
And it adds so much depth to your experience with MSF as well. I mean, the projects that we've all worked on that we love are the ones where you have that incredible sort of camaraderie with your team, and you come home at night and you talk about the things that you did during your day and the problems that you faced and the problems that other people faced. And you learn so much and you have such engaging, wonderful conversations with people. I think they're always the projects that you remember the most. That sort of leads me into this question, actually. Sarah, you hinted at this a little bit before, but one thing that often surprises people is that our international clinical psychologists rarely carry a clinical load themselves, and instead they're largely responsible for training and managing a team of locally hired mental health staff. Could you tell us about how you found that experience?
Yes, absolutely. So as Greg said before, there are positions that are sort of clinical positions, but many of them are as mental health activity managers. So you generally don't carry clinical load in those particular positions. And so it's a new skill set for some people. There's a lot of, and we've talked about this before, but I'll just sort of quickly mention them again. Things like rostering, recruitment, management, those are some of the parts of your role, which, some people think, well, I didn't sign up for this, but that is part of what keeps our team functioning. And so it is actually an important part of the role. So, but probably one of the most rewarding and beneficial and beautiful parts of the role is both the mentoring and the supervision, and then also the training aspect of the role as well. So, you know, we would often deliver training to not only mental health counsellors, but also to the wider, you know, hospital staff, for example, or clinic staff. So, you know, doctors, midwives, and so on and so forth, about the, you know, either the importance of mental health or, for example, signs to look out for in patients, etc., etc. So, depending on the project, obviously. So that can be a really rewarding role as well. And the in-session supervision with counsellors is also, I think, a really important part of the role, because you also get to understand the patients in a way that you wouldn't if you were just sort of doing things from the outside, but you're led by your counsellors. But it gives you better understanding of the population that we're working with, which is so crucial when we're actually sort of trying to deliver the best care. We also have to understand the population and the community so that we can better tailor our service and our work to them. But yes, the other thing I was going to mention was also just at the remote work. And I think now in the last few years, we've all become much more familiar with that across the world. But the first time that I had to do that, my project was in Syria, and, you know, as is often the case with MSF, unpredictable things happen and borders were closed and we couldn't access the hospitals. So for a good month, we actually just had to communicate with the local staff through video conferencing or through phones. We couldn't actually, the international staff didn't have access to the hospital. So that was pre-2020. So we were much less familiar with that style of working than we are now. But yeah, they're also things that we sort of need to think about as well. Yeah, it can be difficult actually to not carry the clinical load. You often find that you want to jump in, but I think the big thing is that, you know, we leave after a few months as international staff, and so upskilling of local staff is just one of the crucial parts to, you know, ultimately the best case scenario is that MSF doesn't have to be there, really. And so, you know, I think there's real importance in terms of the work that we do that's not just direct clinical work, in terms of the upskilling and the supervising.
Fantastic. Thank you for giving us some insight into that. I think it's a really helpful thing for people who are thinking about applying with MSF to understand about the work that they might be doing. We're almost up to our question time. I'd like to encourage anybody who is listening that has some questions to pop them in the chat, and we will do our best to get through all of them. If we don't get through all of them tonight, we will reply to you in the next 24 hours. But before we do go to questions, I have one final question for you both. I'll start with Sarah, sorry. What did you love about working for MSF, and why would you recommend this as a path to people?
Oh, so much, so much. It's so hard to summarize this in a few sentences, but I will. You'll spend a moment with someone who's worked with MSF and you can just feel the impact that it's had, I think. Look, ultimately, MSF, like every other organisation, is not a perfect organisation, but I think we're making a difference, and its values and its vision feels very aligned with mine. And so I loved being part of an organisation and working with people that shared that. And I have made some of my dearest and closest friends and colleagues now are from you know, my time with MSF. It's life-changing. It's enhanced my professional life and personally as well. A lot of personal growth. I've had experiences and been to places that I never would have otherwise, I think. And I've laughed and cried and danced and trekked in all kinds of places in the world with all sorts of people that I probably would never have met, and it's been fabulous. It's been really wonderful. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Greg, what about you? What do you love about MSF? What kept you coming back, and why would you recommend it to people? Why would you encourage them?
I feel like I don't want to mansplain. I think Sarah summed it up so well. I can't even, I just like, exactly. I want to add to the, yeah, look, I will say all of that, the values alignment for me was crucial, because I came from a profession where I was earning a huge amount of money, to a profession where, to a place where I wasn't earning anything, and I didn't care, because it meant so much to me to be able to do that, to have that freedom, the intellectual freedom to come up with ideas, to work with the best people from all over the world to solve some of these really intractable, difficult problems. Like, how do you task shift psychiatric care in places where it's not available? I'm so fortunate to have worked on that problem. I can't say I've solved it. We have solved it fully, but we've come a long way, and you know, those sort of things are so rewarding. And I didn't expect when I started and I was on that first mission that it would lead to that, as well as, you know, some of the best friends. And yeah, so thank you, Sarah, for summarizing it so clearly.
Fantastic. It's always nice to finish on a high note. With that, we might move over to some of the questions that have come up in the chat. The first question is, it's for both Greg and Sarah. They're asking, clinically, what are the biggest challenges that you might face as a psychologist with MSF?
Want to take that, Greg? Or
Please go. Yeah.
Some of the biggest challenges you might face. Look, there are places that we go where there aren't, where we don't have, some of the staff that we have are not as trained and are not as experienced, and we're asking, or they are delivering counselling to some of the most vulnerable people in the world. And so sitting with that and training and knowing that, you know, we don't have access to the same resources that we would necessarily in Australia, I think that can be hard. You know, there are times where we don't have access to, for example, a psychiatrist, like I was saying before. So that is tricky. What else? But look, there are things that I think you will also see that are difficult as well, and I think that's a challenge as a psychologist. Things that you may see in terms of, I don't know, lack of access, or, you know, practices that might be challenging personally. And I think the other challenge as well is we do this job because we are used to trauma in some strange way, but what you see sometimes is really, really tough. And I think that's challenging to then sit with that and come back to a place like Australia, having seen that and witnessed that. But like Jen said, there's a lot of support that is offered, and you form your own natural support through your friendships, through your colleagues, and then there's also formal support as well through, you know, peer support networks and you know, formal sort of psychological supports through MSF as well.
Actually, that brings us really nicely into a question from Soliana, who has said that she's currently in the process of recruitment and wanted to know if MSF has psychosocial support for the staff, specifically the mental health staff. I might ask Greg this one, I think.
Oh, sure. Yes, absolutely. Look, I think MSF is one of the first organizations that started doing this for locally hired and internationally hired staff, and that is one of the central things that we have for all projects is attempting to provide mental health care for everyone on the team, regardless of who they are, including you as psychologists or psychiatrists. And we do that at different levels. We, you know, you can access mental health care sometimes by video in the field if you really need it. We have teams who are available to do that. We have pre and post counselling, and so pre and post discussions that you can evaluate yourself. And we have an EAP program as well for people from Australia who come back, so the Employee Assistance Program. Yeah, I guess it's a bit of a wraparound. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's that's good, and many of the people that are on, the clinicians on the EAP have done assignments not with MSF necessarily, but they have overseas experience, so that's useful.
The only thing that
Yeah.
I might add to that, sorry to leap in, Sarah, is that that assistance is open to all
Yes.
former international staff with MSF Australia New Zealand, and it doesn't matter how long it's been since they were on an assignment with MSF. So we really do endeavour to look after people as much as we can. We understand that people work in challenging contexts and it can be difficult sometimes, and we provide a great deal of support. And there's a lot of informal support as well, like the peer support networks, as Sarah mentioned, and they can be really, really valuable sources of sort of local support.
I will add one thing, is that, in fact, we were talking about opportunities as a psychologist. There is another opportunity as a psychologist, and that is to work in that role internationally. So there are several positions that we recruit to for for clinical psychologists from Australia and New Zealand, where you will be that person, maybe regionally in a certain area, supervising or supporting, depending on your language skills, or back here in Australia, potentially in different places. Once you've had usually that the experience in projects on assignment in different places first, so you know where those people are coming from and their experience.
Fantastic. Now we have a question from Mahmoud. He's asking what learning and development opportunities are available in MSF in project management coordination that can support a medical specialist, i.e. a psychiatrist. I might start with a brief answer on this, and Greg, I don't know if you have more to add, but I know from a sort of project management coordination perspective, we do have a number of development courses. We have training courses. They require a certain amount of experience in project before you can apply for them, and you need to be supported in your application. But we also have things like a mentoring program where we can match people when they're first in position in a coordination role, so that they've got some support outside of the project that they're in. And yeah, we do have a number of courses. It's just you need to have experience under your belt before you can access them. Would you have anything to add to that, Greg?
I'd like to be honest and realistic about this, and that is most psychiatrists come for one mission, and they don't come back because of financial or professional obligations. It's unusual to be to have an opportunity to do one of MSF's formal training programs when you're only doing one mission. You would usually be expected to do subsequent missions. Sometimes missions can be cut short or can be short. So we expect 6 months, but sometimes you might be sent home early and then you could go and do another mission perhaps. There is one key training, which is the activity manager training, which Sarah and I have both done, and I've delivered multiple times, which is a really rewarding training. And if someone's thinking about a second mission, then we would certainly be encouraging them to do that in their first mission, or if they haven't done it in their first mission, in their second mission. Sarah, that's your experience too, would you say?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think much more to add there.
And then as Jen has explained, there are other more advanced trainings. We deliver trainings in the field as well, clinically based trainings, evidence-based developed courses about things like how you deliver psychiatric training, how you deliver supervision. So we don't leave you floundering, and there's a lot of guidelines and a lot of support for you in the field. And keep in mind too, you're working with a team of people. So if you want to know how to do recruitment, there's a recruitment expert in your project, guaranteed. As an example, if you have a management dilemma, you have a project coordinator you can discuss with. So you are surrounded by those experts. They might be younger than you, they might not be doctors, but they will bring a wealth of experience, and that's where I learned a lot.
And I think that's actually a really important point. It's something that we do like to point out to people, as you're operating within a team, and it's a very structured team with MSF, and it's structured for reasons. So we work often in high security settings or settings where there's instability, and we need to know that people are following certain rules. It's really important, and that means that we have quite a strong hierarchy. Now, what that can mean is that you might be reporting to a medical coordinator who isn't a mental health professional, but they are still the ones that are ultimately in charge of the medical program that you fall within. So it can be a little bit of an adjustment. They may not be a doctor, but they will have a great deal of experience and a great deal of experience with MSF. So it's being a little bit comfortable with perhaps needing to advocate a little bit for what your work is, and also being comfortable reporting to people from different professions. Would you say that's fairly accurate, Greg?
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I see a quick question that came up. What is the peer support network? That is an excellent question. And I'm sorry, we use a lot of terms that are common within MSF. You find you pick up the acronyms and the jargon very, very quickly. Our peer support network is something that we run across Australia, New Zealand through our association. And it's a group of people who have been working for MSF on our projects and live locally to you. I think that's probably the way that I would explain it the best. Sorry, Sarah, I think can you please add?
Yeah, shall I jump in because I'm on that network? So
that would be amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's just a group of it is a group of of people that have been on MSF projects before or are still currently doing them, but are back home at the time. And we reach out to people prior to them going on their first mission. It's completely voluntary. We'll just flick an email or a message and say, look, we're open for a chat. And if you just wanted to talk about how you're feeling about going, what do I bring, what do I wear, I'm feeling nervous about this. It's just a really informal sort of chat. And then after you've gone on your assignment, when you come back, we'll reach out again. And again, if you want a phone call or a cup of coffee, there's that opportunity to just connect with someone who's been through a similar experience to you.
Fantastic. That was a much more in-depth answer than I was going to give. Thank you. That was perfect. Now, my understanding, and I could be wrong, but the peer support network often contact you when you return from your assignment as well, don't they?
Yes. So always when you return, and it's completely up to you whether or not you get, and always before you go out on your first assignment as well.
Yeah. Fantastic. And it's something that I'm a big believer in saying yes to things. And I've always spoken to somebody from the peer support network when I've returned. It's always nice to have a chat to somebody who understands where you've come from and what it's been like. And you can just have a little bit of a chat about life in general. I've always found it's been really helpful. Now, I do.
So that's in addition to psychological support that you're offered
Yes.
pre and post as well. So just to separate that out, it's a peer position as opposed to a clinical mental health support.
Absolutely, and it's a much more informal offering. Now, one of the other questions that has come up that we do get asked quite regularly is, what is it like to work with an interpreter, and do you find it impacts your clinical care? Sarah, do you think you could answer this one for us?
Sure. Look, honestly, what it's like to work with an interpreter often depends on your interpreter. So it's always going to shift the clinical, the feeling in the room when you have an interpreter. I would encourage, if you are thinking about applying, if you have opportunities to work, in Australia or New Zealand with people from a diverse range of cultural and language backgrounds, then I think that's a useful thing to do, actually. So working with interpreters is sometimes tricky. Yes, it does shift the way that you interact with a client, but it is absolutely doable if you have a good interpreter. And all the interpreters I've worked with have been absolutely wonderful. And they offer not only interpretation in terms of language, but also just understanding of cultural nuances as well. So, and they can be a nice kind of, they can sort of vouch for us as well, I guess. So it can sometimes actually be a good thing. But yes, it can be difficult at times. It obviously slows things down and you don't always get exactly the exact sort of nuance of everything, but it's something that we need to do. And sorry, can I just add one quick thing as well? There was the question before about the clinical challenges. I think probably it relates to the interpreters as well. One of the clinical challenges is probably that some of our traditional Western psychology techniques that we learned at university may or may not make sense and fit. And it's about us being okay with that and just, and understanding the cultural nuances as well. So, yeah. I mean, I am not from the West myself, but I was trained in the West. And so that word West is not perfect either, but that's all I've got to go with. So, yeah, that's another little addition.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now, we did discuss this a little bit previously, but I have another question here that asks, is it common for there to be a psychiatrist within the project team? And if not, how do you provide medication to patients if it's needed? I'm not quite sure who would be best placed to answer this one.
I might jump in and answer that because it's a problem that I've had to solve over the years. Well, I've had to attempt to solve over the years as an advisor role and working with operations. And I would say we try to respond to that problem in lots of different ways. So sometimes we will have a psychiatrist in the field. It's less common than it's quite uncommon, in fact. I mean, we have how many projects around the world? More than 250 at least, and a lot more than that, I'm sure. And there's a handful that have psychiatrists. The way that we then try to provide psychiatric care where it's not available locally is by task shifting, as we said. So finding a less skilled workforce and training them up using a tool called the mental health gap, which is a tool developed by WHO, MSF, and other organizations. Which kind of breaks down psychiatric care in a stepwise fashion. And then we try to train people within the project or locally to be able to deliver that. And then we might have a psychiatrist in a role of a regional supervisor of those clinicians, maybe coming into those places, supervising, training, and then supervising and following up on that mental health care. And then in some places, we just don't have it, and clinicians have to adapt, as Sarah has experienced as well, unfortunately. And that just really depends. The medication question, it's a good one. MSF is very strict on what pharmaceuticals we provide, and we have very, very strict quality requirements, which means that we almost always only import medication from our international our international sources, from trusted international sources. And we prescribe from those, or our teams prescribe from those. So we know that the medication's safe. I don't know if that answered the question, but this is my first stab at it.
I think that's a really good answer. I think ultimately it's about recognising that we have multiple supports available. We're used to working in contexts where we might have staff gaps or shortages or problems with supply, or we work in low resource settings, and we all need to be flexible and adaptable, but then we have multiple patches and supports that are available to people. So they do have a technical referent, which is a technical advisor that sits within they may sit within Paris that you can contact to get technical support if you need. So we do have those sorts of advisors available. Was there anything that you wanted to add to that, Sarah?
No, I think that's covered it.
Fantastic. In that case, that's our last question. So I think that brings us to an end tonight. I'd like to thank both of you for being here with us. It's been incredibly insightful and really wonderful to have your input and your stories and share your love of the work that we do. I want to thank both of you, and I want to thank everybody who has listened online, and thank you for all of the wonderful questions. So for now, we'll say goodbye and see you at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Jen.